Well, looks like the glare is pretty bad. This is the first time I've tried to do this during the day, so let me just see if I can. Hello, everybody. Man, crazy world out there. And so I was thinking that one of my objectives with this channel was always to try to help to empower conscious people and kind of encourage that. And so I've done research, and I'm looking at eco-friendly and this innovative companies that could make great investments. I'm also looking at research in areas of consciousness and physics, and it was like the opposite of a revelation the other day when I saw this article, and it wasn't really the article that did it, something that it made me realize. I'll get to that later. I don't want to get too off topic. I also want to talk about Neuralink a little bit and just all this. I think that there's a lot of kind of conspiracy going around, but there's also a lot of denial of hard science that actually these things could be problematic. And I kind of see myself as like a mediator because I feel like I'm open-minded, but I'm also skeptical. So I took a really hard look at some of this stuff. And honestly, for example, 5G, I was really surprised what I found. I mean, it's not a good idea. It sounds like it definitely causes tumor growth for sure, and it has a very short range. So they're actually talking about putting towers every like 200 yards. And I don't know if that just means like in like highly populated areas or what, but and also 4G has already been established to be associated with tumor growth. And it's not like 5G is going to replace 4G. They're talking about actually compounding these things together. And we already have, migratory bird problems from the electromagnetic frequencies disturbing, that's for later. But man, it just really blew my mind when I saw how many of the researchers were saying, oh, this is just conspiracy theory. There's no problem. And then, I'm able to find a bunch of solid scientific studies that said the people that say that are lying. They're being paid probably, which, as we'll see, is not anything new. The Freedom of Information Act is a great resource, you guys. If you're curious about something, if you're trying to debunk or confirm some conspiratorial idea, one of the first places I always go to check is the Freedom of Information Act website, because you can determine pretty quickly. I mean, there are a lot of things that people will scoff and laugh in your face for suggesting that the government has actually admitted to, the U.S. government. And to me, that's pretty disturbing that people will laugh in your, that is like, you guys, I'm a pacifist. I used to have a really bad temper, but the only time I still want to punch people is when I post something really important that I know to be true, and they respond with one of those laughing, crying faces, and it's like the most asinine fucking thing ever. So where do we want to start with this stuff? Okay, so this is one of the most exciting things that I have ever heard in my entire life. These Mycelium-Based Technologies. Of course, you guys are probably all familiar with Paul Stamets and the idea that we could use, I think it was something really common like oyster mushrooms to clean up oil spills in the ocean. There are plastics that are biodegradable that can be made from mycelium. But now there are companies like Ini and Carlo Ratti Associati. Hello, Drainage Boy. That's a wild name. They built the Shell Mycelium Pavilion. And Ecovative Design. They're making packaging materials, but what I'm most excited about is the possibility of making insulation, because fiberglass is no good. I don't know what they use these days. I haven't worked in construction in decades, but the idea that we could, these materials are ready in 5 days, okay? They require almost no energy to produce. We're talking about using living insulation, which is pretty incredible. Replacing polystyrene right? So styrofoam, which is a petroleum product, could be eliminated. But one of my biggest horrors of living on this planet, of being in 3D, is the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. And I hate to sound like a hippie, but I mean, when I was preparing for this live cast, I Googled, environmental news, and I was like, oh no. I mean, I knew it was bad. And I'm really, I'm trying to avoid the darker, drearier stuff because I want to stay positive today and kind of think about where the innovations are happening, what we can all be excited about, an embarrassing bunch of chaotic hatred and stupidity. So I don't want to think about any of that stuff today. So super excited. You guys, I would encourage you to reach out to these companies if they represent investment opportunities. Something that just occurred to me while I was talking that I think is an amazing possibility. Some of these psilocybin companies that, like NASDAQ magazine is calling literally the best performing stocks of the next decade. A lot of the big billionaire investors are saying this right now, which is pretty incredible to hear. And we'll get into why that is in a minute. But, the psilocybin, if somehow the USDA or the FDA in the US is copacetic to all of this, because it's a major threat to pharma. This is why psychedelics were banned in the first place, right? And other governments around the world, so far, the progress in terms of like red tape and changing the laws has surprised people, I think. A little bit more malleability than we were expecting, considering that the hysteria was so recent. But the same companies that are mass producing these compounds that could reverse the negative trajectory of the planet at the moment could also use their mycelium and stuff that they're producing the mushrooms from to build totally eco-friendly mycelium homes and insulation. And I mean, they're making packaging materials, and it's just an extraordinary thing to see. Of course, Paul Stamets has been telling us this for decades, but it seems like we're finally at a point where the technology and the money is there to, thank you, Guy, to start actually seeing the reality and the impact that this stuff can have. And so that's that for that subject, I guess. Graphene is another thing that I wanted to mention that I've been hearing a lot about. One of the, I think everyone knows this. I mean, I almost hesitate to mention it out of fear of being just like ridiculously redundant. But, big oil, the military-industrial complex in the United States, and ISIS and these type of people in the Middle East are really the same sort of thing. They're big money manipulating religious extremists in order to maintain an archaic modality of rule, basically, right? And I say this all the time, but I really do feel like the fact that we are at the point where we have these graphene energy harvesting circuits, that graphene is just made from carbon. It occurs naturally. It can be produced very cheaply. It's basically just carbon in a honeycomb lattice, which, by the way, for those of you that aren't familiar with graphene, no one's really quite sure exactly how it works. It has something to do, they think, with the geometry of the honeycomb lattice, Brownian movement, and the laws of thermodynamics, and there is nanometer waves. That's the thing that they don't understand. They just think, it's got something to do with the geometry of the honeycomb and the carbon. Now, think about that for a second. This is like sacred geometry manifest in the macroscopic world, giving rise to energy from nothing. This is how consciousness created the universe, you guys. I've been babbling about this a little bit off and on for weeks now because I'm not a mathematician. I don't really have the language to really articulate this vision that I've had, but I knew it was correct, and so far I've been able to find like the Peter-Bohm hypothesis and a couple of other things where people that do have the language have actually tried to present mathematical models of this. And I think that the way that graphene is producing energy is what I was talking about, what I was trying to explain. So I was really excited when I read that. But basically, we're in the early stages of development with graphene. And So, speaking of investments, you guys, I did write down the name of a couple of companies: Real Graphene USA, Verserion. Of course, Tesla's using it. And so, what I'm saying though is, right now it's producing relatively low volt small devices and whatnot, but out of nothing. I mean, this is very similar to this idea Nikola Tesla had to draw energy current from the environment and power the planet without using fossil fuels. So graphene is another potential liberating innovation that has come along very, very recently. And again, you guys, it's Ascended Masters Tea Talk. That's awesome, man. But yeah, the blowback that we're seeing, man, the sudden leap in consciousness, the interest in psychedelics, all of these technologies that would totally eliminate the fossil fuel industry, and also resolving the psychological aberrations that allow people to be ruled and manipulated and sent to war and shit. I mean, we're so close to putting a stop to all of it. I mean, let's just sit here and have a moment of silence and really take that, really take that in, because it's true. It's true. We're going to get to the proof, because I almost hesitate to say some of this stuff. The promise of psychedelic medicine is so powerful that one of the biggest hurdles I think that we face in convincing people of the efficacy of these substances is it's too good to believe. It's like, not only are we trying to deprogram, what is it now, 75, 80 years of hysteria and lies and misinformation regarding these compounds, but we're actually trying to convince them that they're like good for you and even like safe for adolescents. I saw somebody posting, somebody said, well, when is it okay to start taking psychedelics? And they said, well, not until your brain stops developing. And I thought, well, actually, I don't think that's true. And marijuana, that is true, because it causes like arrested development. It freezes brain cells, basically. It doesn't kill them the way that they used to say, but it can, with overuse, it can neutralize them kind of. And they will wake back up after you stop abusing marijuana. But there is some, negative consequence on brain development. So yeah, teenage kids probably shouldn't smoke marijuana. But studies have been done, and we'll get to that when we get to the psychedelic section on ayahuasca. And it's the kids, they didn't have body dysmorphia, no anxiety, no alcohol abuse compared to the control group that didn't drink ayahuasca. And they're better at all kinds of cognitive functions, and they showed no developmental problems in any other areas compared to the control group. So I think I went a little bit further than I meant to there, but I think that is one of the biggest problems, that the truth, I mean, you guys probably look this stuff up yourself, but some of the researchers at places like Harvard and Princeton have said things like, this discovery of psychedelics is the most important development in modern human history. And it's not a discovery of modern human history, but I still, kudos to that guy. I think he was at Harvard. But let's try to stay on track. I think we were still trying to talk about graphene. Yeah, I mean, a simple carbon structure. Oh, what I was saying is that because it's still in the early developmental stages, it can be assumed that the number of applications is going to explode over time. And given the trajectory of the evolution of technology over the last 100 years, 50 years, it's got this telescopic thing that it does, right? Where it's like 10,000 years from hunting and gathering to agriculture, and then 1,000 years from agriculture to the development of modern technology, and it just faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. This is one of the things that informed Terence McKenna's ideas of novelty theory, right? So point being, right now there's a lot of interest in graphene. It's something that's blown up. It's eco-friendly. It's definitely a way to fight the entrenched elite dinosaur morons that are pitting us all against each other, destroying the planet just because they're complete fucking psychopaths. And so please, if you can, invest in these like mycelium packaging companies, the psychedelic medication companies, the graphene companies. Thank you, Shaman Shed. Technology is not scary. This is something that we can diverge for a second to address. Ayahuasca is a technology. There's nothing wrong with technology. What is wrong is that we have an empty material society that creates a bunch of lost, and it's not even just that it's an empty material society. On top of that, we have all kinds of toxic pharmacological uh, uh, neurotoxins, basically. I mean, like, I say this maybe too often, but the ocean is testing positive for benzodiazepines. I mean, it's not technology. It's the mind state that people have been in. And I'm on the fence a lot about how far some of this should go, as we'll see when we get into the Neuralink thing, man. Holy shit. But it's all very complicated. Dr. Timothy Leary, who was a major influence on me as a teenager, has kind of been, I think, forgotten, overshadowed by Terence McKenna. But after the 60s, 70s, I guess maybe it started in the 80s, he became almost more interested in virtual reality and in the development of technology and the idea that we could enhance, that we could reduce human suffering. And I mean, there's so many positive potential applications for it. But, if you have a bunch of lost, aimless, shallow idiots doing anything with anything, it's not going to be good. I mean, the house is under construction over there, so we may have some chainsaws to contend with. But I'm really excited about this stuff, you guys. I really am. I mean, the political shit show in the United States just dominates social media to the extent that it's like it's occulted all of the other stuff that's going on in the world. And the truth is that we are closer to a revolution of a scale and scope and import that has never been seen, at least in recorded history. That's why they're doing it. Sorry, I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but at what point, at what point do you just not acknowledge the fucking elephant in the room, Okay, so we talked about the graphene a little bit. I mean, they're going to start to make guitars out of it, and that's really interesting too, because it's going to interact with the energy of the vibrations of the strings, I think, in a way that will probably produce some. It's a really interesting thing. All right. That's the other one. A new study published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology on ayahuasca, using brain imaging techniques, determined that a single dose of ayahuasca can cause lasting changes in the parts of the brain that deal with higher cognition. And so, this in particular, we're talking about communication between the salience network and the default mode of the brain. And the default mode deals with kind of like daydreaming and introspection and this kind of stuff. And the salience mode, they're not as sure. But in practical terms, what this increased connectivity in the brain leads to is the resolution of addiction, depression, alcoholism, basically, PTSD, and even frontotemporal dementia, which is basically like you would present in a person as if they were an autistic psychopath, considered untreatable, single dose of ayahuasca, and 85% of the time they're like normal on the spot. Autism, I mean, you name it. You name it. And this is what I was alluding to earlier when I was talking about this stuff just sounds too good to be true. And that is part of the reason why people are just shaking their heads. I mean, people have been trying to convince the mainstream that psychedelics were good for them since the 1930s, really. The hysteria was not generated by research. In fact, the researchers in the early stages of the game were saying the same sort of stuff, even though it wasn't as sophisticated. They didn't have the technology to do like, the brain imaging and stuff the way that we do now. But they've always been telling the governments, like, this is amazing. We can cure addiction. We can reform prisoners. We can do all this stuff. And it only takes a single treatment. And they said, illegal. If you're found in possession of it, you're going to jail for 1 billion years, and that's really what happened. I mean, 20-year-old kids get busted with 3 sheets of acid and they're in prison for decades. People get busted with heroin, they're out in 6 months. And that's why, you guys, for real. Okay, and ayahuasca has been shown to cause significant changes in the physical structure in several parts of the brain, and this seems to facilitate higher cognitive stuff. So, like, you would be better at physics, and I also personally suspect that change in structure has something to do with why people start to experience more synchronicities and telepathy and precognition and those sort of more subtle manifestations or capacities of consciousness that are not normally engaged or not consistently engaged. Also, in support of that, this is one of the most incredible developments in the area of psychedelic research ever. The brain scans that were done on people on psilocybin and LSD proved that there was electrical activity in parts of the brain where there normally never is any. And so researchers, of course, don't know what to make of that. You know, I mean, you would assume that it is probably good that people are using more of their brains. But the reality is that we have no idea what that electrical activity means. I have my suspicions that what it indicates is that there actually is any kind of change in consciousness is going to correspond with physical changes in the brain. Anything that you learn, anything that you forget, all of this is to do with new neural pathways forming or shriveling up and disconnecting. Both things happen. And so if it's true that we are expanding consciousness and even gaining access to capacities of consciousness that the modern ontological model doesn't really have room for, that's going to correspond with something physically different happening in the brain, right? So we're going to have electrical activity in parts of the brain that we don't normally use when we're experiencing telepathy, precognition, or any of these other sort of capacities of consciousness that are not normally engaged. I sort of mentioned this earlier a little bit. Oh, wait, actually, psilocybin, a little bit more about psilocybin. I've seen a lot of questions, like in my psychedelic plants, entheogens, and medicines groups on Facebook about microdosing and treating depression with psilocybin. And people often say, well, I didn't do any research. And, my advice there is that you can also, you can wow. You can just type a caveman sentence into Google and pretty much get an answer to anything, so that would probably be helpful. But what gives these compounds their efficacy is the way that they cause neurogenesis and enhance neuroplasticity. So the brain is directed by our will and by consciousness. And so we have the capacity, I think even subconsciously, to hardwire our own minds using conscious direction, right? And so what has been observed with psilocybin and LSD is that brain cells that have been shriveled by depression or alcoholism or any one of these neurological aberrations, they actually regrow. And one of the most exciting developments in that particular area, it goes beyond just being able to sort of regenerate shriveled brain cells. There are actually a group of doctors right now working to resuscitate brain dead people with psilocybin and people with severe brain damage, because psilocybin is the only compound that has ever demonstrated the capacity to regrow damaged brain cells. And I think that this is another example of what I was alluding to earlier when I said that I think one of the problems that we're having in advancing psychedelic medicine and getting new people to listen is that it sounds too good to be true. Not only are they already predisposed to think that psychedelics are damaging and that they will make you insane and all of this sort of hysterical stuff, we're actually telling them that psychedelics can do things that we may have previously thought were even impossible, which is the case with psilocybin regenerating damaged brain cells. So I was talking about how we need to use our money muscle as conscious people. My entire life, I'm totally guilty of this. I wanted nothing to do with the Matrix. I didn't care about money. I didn't see any real reason. Like I could always kind of do whatever I wanted to some extent. And it's just not something that I really took any consideration for. But as I've gotten older, now I realize that some of the circumstances in this world are dictated to us and not by us. And so one of those is that money is power. And if we want conscious people to be able to have an impact, then we need to be able to take responsibility for acquiring the power, which to some extent is financial influence, right? So I'm not trying to get too off topic there, but I really do want to encourage, even if you only have a little bit of money to throw at something, like an investment in psilocybin, please do, for a number of reasons. We need to start taking the money away from big pharma and funneling it into the companies that are doing the things that we need them to be doing. And the potential for psilocybin, LSD, and analogs that are created by these new companies to eliminate these toxic, brain damaging, there's even links between SSRIs and serious, the school shootings, the people that go on rampages. And of course, their excuse is, well, they had mental problems. That's why they were on the SSRIs. But then that doesn't really suggest that the SSRIs, at the very least, that they're efficacious, right? Do me a favor, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon if you can. We're trying to go to Puyo and Gualaquiza in the next couple of weeks. Also, I haven't mentioned, I was just contacted by a Brazilian shaman, and they want me to try to help them establish a platform to get their message out to the world. I can't even pronounce the name of the tribe. I'm going to have to ask him. We're going to talk in a couple of days. So that was crazy. It's a great honor. I don't know why or how that happened. He just contacted me out of the blue and just kind of said, hey, I picked you to help us. And I thought you probably would. So like, of course I will if I can, Okay, so we were talking about psilocybin, and the top company right now is MindMed. The thing about all of these companies in terms of investment potential is that it's going to be at least a few years. And the election in the United States could have it could be bad for a lot of things. Joe Biden has never been, he's made some seriously insane anti-pot comments pretty recently. The possibility that administration is going to somehow get in the way of psychedelic medicine progress, is there. I don't know how significant it is, but that's the one caveat, I guess, that even though so far the laws that have been adapting, the FDA gave psilocybin breakthrough approval status, which completely blew my mind, because they're acknowledging that this Schedule 1 drug actually has medical value, which means that they have to reschedule it. And that means that any other indoor ring compound like LSD or MDMA is going to have to come under evaluation as well, because they're all demonstrating efficacy for the same applications. And the breakthrough medical status or breakthrough treatment status is not just an acknowledgement that psilocybin is useful medically, but it is also an acknowledgement that it is such an important development in medicine that it deserves special treatment, and that accelerated revision of law is justified by the importance of its medical applications. So MindMed is a big one. MindMed is focused mostly on addiction and ADHD, treating psilocybin or using psilocybin and LSD for ADHD. And then they are, okay, and this is where it gets scary, you guys. The one thing that bothers me about this development of the psychedelic medicine going mainstream is that big money is getting a hold of it. And just in the same way that the DEA was able to create the Analogs Act in order to make like anything related to LSD, you could also get charged with possession of LSD. And they did that kind of because like ALD 52 and IP LSD and all of these different things, a lot of them are either metabolized into LSD on contact with water, or they're actually converted into LSD in the body, basically. So you could get away with like shipping or distributing an analog, some of which were dangerous. Even they had some legitimate ground to stand on it in creating the Analogs Act, actually. But what I'm concerned about is that these companies are going to create a bunch of analogs, or maybe even a single analog, and then create legislation that allows them to patent one compound, but then have like an analog patent act to shield themselves from competition, and so that they can say that they have a patent on all the analogs of these compounds that are actually just related to psychedelics. So I think it's really important, if we are choosing to invest in these companies or even to buy their products, that we take a good hard look at their behavior. And I think like super conscious consumers, that this is one of the best weapons that we have if we just invest a little bit more time and scrutinize a little bit more deeply. Okay, another one is Champignon Brands. Let's see what they are focusing on. They're looking to develop commercialized patented treatments for PTSD and depression using ketamine, MDMA, and psilocybin. That's another interesting angle that a lot of these companies are looking at, because you can't really patent LSD or psilocybin or ketamine. So a lot of these companies are actually just developing patented treatment protocols so that they have something that they have intellectual property over that is an effective product. And again, I don't know if I mentioned this. I know I did at the beginning of the video, but some of the biggest investors in the world have said that for the coming decade, psilocybin and related stocks represent the best opportunities. That says terrible things about the state of our global mental health. First of all, okay. And then Revive. Revive is a CBD company that is focused mostly on inflammatory liver diseases. But they have just acquired, what is the name of the company? Psilocin Pharma. So they're moving into the psilocybin business as well. And so that's the third big investment opportunity as far as like the big companies that are going public in psilocybin. It's true, you guys, and I'll offer a little bit of my personal experience with these compounds. I became very ill when I was in my early 20s, and it was basically I would eventually determine that it was some sort of autoimmune problem, or an aggregate of them, even, because I was like really, I still have never like fully recovered. And this ultimately led to an opiate addiction, on and off and on and off and on and off and on and off. And in order to get out of it eventually, I had a friend that had also been through it, and he suggested to me, you should take Suboxone. And now, when I say I had an opiate problem, I don't mean that I was shooting heroin every day or even, snorting 80 milligram Oxycontin pills. I was mostly just taking a few Vicodin every day. But if you've done that for 10 years, you're going to have some physical withdrawal. And I had been through that once before, and I didn't want it to happen again because it is absolutely as bad as they tell you it is. And I can't even imagine, man. Kudos to the people that really get off of like seriously hard drugs or really bad heroin addictions, because even just something like Vicodin, if you've been taking it for long enough, I mean, I was twitching and flopping around on the ground for 5 days. You can't sleep, so there's no escape. There's nothing you can do to get away. So anyways, this guy suggested that I take Suboxone. It melted my brain. I've never been the same. It's only recently since I've started to use psychedelics again, because that's another thing that I noticed. It's like when you're in that addiction, or if you're hiding from yourself in any number of different ways, people tend to have a resistance to taking psychedelics. So even though I had been studying this stuff since I was a teenager and I had some idea of what it could do, when I was kind of lost down that opiate rabbit hole, I stopped taking psychedelics almost entirely for like 10 years. So what I'm getting at here is that after the Suboxone, my brain was destroyed. I'm a musician, and I learned so many songs so quickly all the time. All I ever did was play. After the Suboxone, I would play like 2 paragraphs of music over and over and over and over, hours and hours and hours and hours. I could not remember anything. It just totally melted my brain. And so, and I don't feel like I have really regained, I have never really made it back to the degree of articulation and concision. And I'm getting closer, but it's only because of psychedelic medicine. I mean, I wish that I had like an old recording I could play for you guys or something. I mean, it was horrific. And so now, once again, it's taken me a few years, but I have been able to rebuild my brain to the extent that I'm able to memorize complex, long pieces of music again, lyrics. And the longer that I use these medicines correctly and responsibly, my cognition continues to improve, my emotional balance. Okay, so there's one more study with ayahuasca that I think is worthy of mention, because the youth, man, that's where it's at. For us, for people my age and older, a big part of I'll talk about Kratom before we move on to Neuralink for sure. The youth, of course, a big part of our healing is healing our lineage so that we don't pass it on to our children. I mean, in my case, my parents were well-meaning people. They had good hearts, both of them, but they were insane, particularly my mom. I didn't know it because that was what I lived with. But, now that I have some perspective, I realize like I was raised by a single mother that was completely mentally ill in like 9 different ways. There was tons of violence in my neighborhood and I was severely damaged, long story short. And so part of my responsibility to my own healing has got nothing to do with me. It's so that the abuse that led to my mom's mental health issues, the abuse that led to my father's mental health issues, it stops with me. It stops with us. It stops with this generation here and now. And with psilocybin and ayahuasca and all of these other tools at our disposal, and yoga, meditation, all of it, right? We have no excuses. I mean, if we were actually able and people were cooperating, we could revolutionize this whole planet in an extraordinarily short period of time. And the resistance has no solid ground to stand on. Science is behind us, anecdotal evidence, the decades of, let's not get too off track. Okay, so Frankie Strychnine, what are my thoughts on Kratom? My thoughts on Kratom are that it helped me a lot. What happens also with Suboxone is that the withdrawal and the the dopamine balance does not restore for a very, very long time. There's acute withdrawal, and then there is post-acute withdrawal. Acute withdrawal is when you're flopping around in the bed, depending on how bad your habit was, you might be vomiting and shitting all over yourself or whatever. In my case, it wasn't that bad, but 5 days, no sleep, your muscles are burning. It's horrible. But then post-acute withdrawal is like, 6, 8, 9 months of just being miserable, depressed. It's not good. And Kratom takes care of it. You can be on heroin, and you can take a couple of spoonfuls of Kratom and stop doing heroin right then on the spot. But you can't, and I made this mistake, okay? I started taking way too much Kratom, way too long, you know what I mean? I had excuses, wasn't in the best health, feeling all the time, Yeah, I'm glad you found Kratom before you resorted to Suboxone or Methadone as well. In fact, a lot of the clinics will tell you to go back. If you go to certain clinics and you say, I'm on Suboxone, they will say, go back out and do heroin for 2 weeks and then come back so that we can get you off of the dope. You can't trust Big Pharma, man. Don't take anything they make. Just don't. Unless you absolutely have to. Just don't do it. Just do not. The greatest revelation for me in that regard is when I realized that when these big companies were buying up smaller pharmaceutical companies and raising the price of life-saving medication from $300 a year to $500,000 a year, like literally, I'm not exaggerating, that actually happened. Knowing they were killing people, like these guys will murder people for profit, knowing fully cognizant of the fact they're doing. I mean, they were in court. The judge was like, you do understand what you're doing, right? It's not like there was any possibility that they were just like, oh, we didn't realize we were literally killing people to make. But that drug was already profitable before they did that, right? So, no, you can't trust these people, man. God. So, anyways, what I'm saying is that, like I said, Suboxone and Methadone are definitely, I think, worse than heroin. And honestly, heroin, just speaking from a physiological point of view or a pharmacophysiological point of view, whatever, it's actually not really toxic. It does no damage to any organ in your body. The reason it kills people is because the part of the brain that regulates breathing slows down to the point where it stops if you take too much. And I'm not advocating for heroin use or saying that it's safe, but the problem nowadays mostly is that they're putting fentanyl in it, which is a horrible, it'll eat your skin off. You have to handle it with gloves. And so now a big part of the reason why heroin has become so destructive and addictive and dangerous is because they're putting pharmaceuticals in it that are making it far worse than it already was. But what I was saying about Kratom is that it can be very helpful. I definitely think that having a Kratom habit is definitely way healthier than being on pills or going into the ghetto and buying heroin. But it still is addictive. It still has withdrawals. They're not that bad, but it was hard for me to stop using. I definitely became dependent upon it. And, hold on, guys. My battery's going to die. Okay, so enough talk about drugs. I think, even the good ones, there's other stuff happening that's just about as exciting. Some of it's kind of scary. Okay, so Neuralink. I'm only talking about this because so many people have asked me to. I don't even know where to start. I mean, Elon Musk, first of all, it is difficult for me not to sort of hate billionaires. I think that it's immoral to be a billionaire and it's dumb. And I mean, in the case of Elon Musk, I have to say that of all the billionaires, he makes the best case for maybe justifying it because his companies are making meaningful innovations. if you're really actually using your resources, if you're really a prima mobile, if you're someone that is really pushing humanity, I mean, humanity only moves by the light of genius, right? So if that's the case and he's doing good work, I mean, I'm trying to be open-minded, but I still feel like I'm very weary of any billionaire. And he has definitely shown signs of imbalance, right? Maybe he just goes to festivals with Grimes and he's gotten too high and said some crazy shit on Twitter or whatever, and it doesn't really mean that much. But I think that letting this guy put a chip in your brain is kind of fucking crazy. And it's not just that it's crazy. I think that we can already do everything that Neuralink is supposedly going to do for us. He's talking about telepathy, access to the entire internet. Like you could just have Google in your head or something. There are a lot of benefits, and I am definitely on the fence of integrated biotechnologies, I guess, with psychedelics. If we could really make this merger of like a more spiritual conscious awareness augmented by these ultra advanced technologies, or are they going to use 5G to like turn us all into automatons or like walk everyone off cliffs that they don't want, like lemmings or something? And I'm kind of being sarcastic there, but I wouldn't really rule it out either. I mean, I remember reading about this chip 20 years ago that they had developed some sort of material that goes around the edge, and it was very, very tiny. And they said that if it lodged so that the edge was touching a single nerve, that they could communicate with your nervous system. I don't know if I trust that. So that's really, but honestly, the thing that bothers me, I think, the most about it is that I really do believe that just about everything that Neuralink is promised to be able to do to enhance our consciousness, we already have the capacity to do that. So it's almost like, the most paranoid part of me sees Elon Musk and the Neuralink as like an avatar of the Demiurgos that is like trying to keep us in the material realm and totally disconnected from the true capacities of consciousness, to integrated consciousness, to what happens when you experience stenosis. Now that you already have a chip in your head giving you telepathy and access to all the worldly information, what do you need a spiritual life for? I mean, it could go either way, you guys. So for those of you that have been asking me about that, who am I to say, I guess? But my personal feeling is that I'm extremely weary of it. And I've already experienced telepathy. The one advantage I can see is that in my experience, my experiences of telepathy, precognition, all of these kind of things, I'm very well convinced that I've had legitimate experiences of those things, but not consistently. It's not like I can just do it on the spot, And I also have to acknowledge that I haven't put nearly as much energy into developing those things as I maybe could have. And I think that I've seen a tremendous amount of evidence that we are collectively starting to experience these things to a degree that is unprecedented in human history, and they're so specific, the nature of this stuff. It's like, okay, in the beginning, awakening stages, the synchronicities, the strings of 3 numbers that line up at certain times when you're thinking about certain stuff. Like people, Maynard James Keenan from Tool, there's a 20-year-old video of him randomly talking to some interviewer that I only saw recently. I had these experiences well before I even really started using the internet. And now, I get messages from people that I've never met before that are describing all the experiences that I've had. And I'm like, I know what caused this, it's pretty impossible for me to continue to really doubt that there is something happening in the evolution of our consciousness and that we are engaging new capacities. So I do feel that Neuralink could come along and derail all of that. And so I think that we need to be much more advanced as well as spiritual beings or conscious people, at least, before we even try to integrate a more sophisticated system. We cannot manage the consciousness that we already have, the information that we already have. We are not able to even come to terms with the world as it is with, and I really don't think that just, I mean, you guys, at least the delay of having to pick up your phone and push some buttons is there, you know, before these cell phones can distract. Like, I mean, some of the crazy stories that I post, you know, I didn't have a smartphone back then when all of this stuff happened. And I was thinking about that the other day, and I realized if I had been constantly like this Hawaiian shaman's calling the wind and it blows, and I'm like fumbling to pull my phone out to video it so I can prove it later or something, like, I just don't know with that kind of distraction, I even would have been attenuated to the kind of subtle frequencies that I needed to be in order to even have these experiences in the first place. So I don't know that having that directly in your brain would really facilitate the development that we need to see globally. Well, I disagree, Mike. Okay, he's saying that the material world geniuses, their drive and ambition that has its foundations in this material gain with psychedelic, surely the ambition is within. Balance, man, balance. Malkut is in Keter and Keter is in Malkut, you know. I don't think that this idea of asceticism or spirituality negating the pursuit of the material hedonistic even stuff. I mean, if I had $5 million suddenly, I would definitely buy a Lamborghini, even if I only drove around for a couple of weeks, you know, because I always wanted one since I was a child. There's nothing wrong with that. But without the integration of what you learn from psychedelics, without some mitigating wisdom, you're absolutely correct. But I think that that's what we need to change. We have these two extremes where we have a spiritual community, hippies, people, whoever, you know, that are like, reject Babylon. And it's like, well, yes, kind of, you know, but you're not going to stop them if you don't empower yourself. And you're not going to do that without money. Sorry. I mean, at least not until the whole paradigm changes. And guess who has to change the paradigm? We do. So I think embracing material success without losing our roots in gnosis. You know, this is what we've got to accomplish, and it's an amazing opportunity. It's not like it's like a burden. It's like we are potentially able to create a greater level of freedom, greater levels of personal expression. It appears that psychedelic compounds can increase our intelligence, enhance our memory. Like that blew my mind last night when I was reading about Neuralink. I was like, wait a minute, this is just psilocybin. There's nothing this like chip can do that psilocybin can't, except that psilocybin is like way more interesting. I mean, yeah. So the I Ching says about Neuralink, weak line in the place of transition, undecided whether to go back or forward, no blame. That about sums it up, right? Okay, but we should also talk about AI for a second, because Neuralink is definitely going to be integrated with AI. And AI, nobody's really sure if the programmers have done this in order to try to be funny or if this is just happening. But there are videos of the robots saying like, well, we are going to take over the planet and kill all the humans. And like, are these things serious or is this supposed to be funny? You know, like what is going on? So this is one of those areas where the conspiracy theorists kind of get it's like a point in their favor, right? Because what happens when a single unit of an AI robot can do the work of an entire skyscraper full of humans. I mean, we already have like the collapse of the construction industry and all of these outdated, like, you know, I mean, fully automated gas stations, the checkout people in the, you know what I mean? We're already seeing the automation of a whole lot of human jobs in agriculture. It's been a massive thing. I mean, why do you think Trump is trying to build a wall to keep the Mexicans out? They just don't need them anymore. That's the thing. I mean, people think it's racism, and I'm not saying Trump isn't racist, but that's not why he's doing that. And they would be doing it whether it was him or not, because they just don't need the farmhands anymore. They don't need the immigrant workers anywhere near the numbers that they did even 10 years ago. And so I think middle America, with their erroneous concept of white privilege, has got a big surprise coming when these robots are all able to be manufactured much less at much less expense and have advanced the technology some. Big trouble. Big trouble. And I think that the people that talk about population control as part of the elite agenda, I don't think that's ridiculous at all. In fact, if you read the writings of people like Lao Tzu and The Art of War, and the people that the rulers in Europe and stuff took counsel with, the Egyptian pharaohs, managing population has always been a consideration of the elite. And when you've used almost all your resources, nearly completely destroyed the ocean, you have rendered almost 60% of the population, once we have, AI workers, irrelevant. What are you going to do with all these people? Where are you going to put them? Where are you going to feed them? The oceans there's 10% of the life that we had in 1970 is still alive in the oceans. Where are you going to feed them? I mean, you guys see what I'm getting at. Like, I'm not trying to be a fear monger, but it is kind of concerning. Okay, so now let's talk about 5G, because people have been asking me about this as well. And I think I have okay internet. I mean, I'm in Ecuador. It's kind of rainy even, and it seems like I've had a good signal for a few hours. Basically, the idea with it is that it is a wider bandwidth, and it is divided up into a whole bunch of different channels. And so this reduces interference, which would improve internet for people. Here's the problem, though, and there's a number of problems. One of the problems is that 5G apparently doesn't have its reach is no good. So they want to put towers, I shit you not, every 100 to 200 meters. And I don't know if that means all over the whole planet, or, if any of you guys know the answer to that, please let me know in the comments section. Because I'm curious, I guess I can do some more research, and I'm sure I will. But here's the crazy part of it. When I was doing this research last night, I pull up, the first page of Google, is 5G dangerous? And it says, reputable source, no, these people are full of crap and they're conspiracy theorists. And then the next one says, yes, absolutely, and then on and on and on. And so that's pretty weird, because aren't we supposed to believe that science is really good at answering basic questions like, does 5G cause cancer? And here's the reality of it, you guys, and people hate me for saying this, but they shouldn't, because it's important. I don't remember what it was, but I was doing some research a little while back, and the egg industry had a problem because some researcher had conducted some trials and determined that eggs had as much cholesterol, bad cholesterol, as cigarettes. And so the lobbying arm of the egg industry contacted someone at Princeton, a professor, and they said, we need you to make a fake study that refutes those findings. And this is the interesting part. The guy, the professor at Princeton, didn't respond how dare you, ask me to compromise the integrity of this great institution and insult me and my professional integrity. And he said, oh, no, I can't do that. That paper was written by a colleague of mine. And I mean, you guys would have to read it. Like, it just reads like, this is standard protocol for people to create fake studies because they've been bribed, even as high up the, what would you call it, the intellectual ladder as Princeton and Harvard, right? And this is another Freedom of Information Act release. What happened is somehow this situation ended up in a courtroom, and one of the lawyers filed for Freedom of Information Act releases that were relevant to the procedures, and that is how this was unearthed. And so what I'm saying about that is that people have no access to any reliable information. When people say like, oh, is your source credible? Is Harvard credible? 99% of the mainstream would say, oh, absolutely. Bullshit. No, they're not. We've caught them cheating. We've caught them lying. We've caught them taking bribes. Princeton too. No, you never know. You never know. So I guess what I'm getting at is that when it comes to assessments of for-profit endeavors, right, I'm going to lean towards the negative findings because that's less likely to have been influenced in the interest of protecting some industry's profit or some corporation's profit. So it's very difficult to figure anything out in this age of misinformation and total and complete corruption of our educational institutions, of, I don't know what to call them, regulatory agencies, I guess, like the FDA. And anyways, so I saw this whole big string of people saying, no, 5G is not dangerous. And then I saw a Scientific American article that said, despite what so many people are telling you, the innovation with the 5G are millimeter waves. These were not part of 4G, which, as I said before, actually has been connected to tumor growth without the addition of these millimeter waves. So irrefutable, multiple peer-reviewed studies determined that short-term exposure to millimeter waves can cause skin, eye, and testicular cancer in both rats and humans. And because they are planning to put so many towers so close together, the overexposure to unhealthy concentrations of this radiation is going to be so dangerous that at the time of the publication of this article, there were over 250 scientists and doctors from all over the world who have signed a stay of deployment until more research can be done. But more research to what? I mean, we've already established that 4G alone is creating tumors, disrupting the migratory patterns of all sorts of necessary insects and birds. And then, people have questions about, okay, well, then we all get this Neuralink, which I forgot to mention isn't even expensive. I think he was saying it'll be like $1,000, including the surgery, to get the chip put in. So this becomes mandatory. And one day they just flip on a switch and use the 5G to take over. I mean, it sounds like some bullshit invasion of the body snatchers kind of scenario, but I wouldn't put anything past these people. I really wouldn't. I mean, I think that the people that rise up to the top, particularly globally, I mean, you have to be cutthroat to get to the top of a corporation, even more so to get to the top of a business. So to rise to the top of the political shit heap, I think it's a good bet that they're all psychopaths and sociopaths, and that we shouldn't underestimate them or worry about anything. Fear is just not worth your time. So that's really it, you guys. I'm going to do another one of these hopefully next Tuesday, and we're going to talk about microbial life on Venus, the implications of that, which are definitely that there's a microbe on Venus is an alien, right? I mean, basically. The Pentagon has admitted that they have recovered 3 crafts, and I quote from the Pentagon release, of non-earthly origin. And I saw this one day on Facebook, and it's like nobody cares afterwards. We're going to talk about how in the hell that could possibly be. And well, I didn't really get into the environmental thing except for the mycelium, the California fires. Man, I'm from California. I was going to single day. It says reconnecting. I don't know if you guys. Okay. So in closing, there's this been started with some kind of weapon, or there's also been like agent provocateurs maybe out there starting fires. I know for a fact that a lot of it is pot growers trying to burn down the cartels' marijuana because there's so much of it. That's the price way down. They do it every year. Burned down Lake County a couple of years, almost the entirety of Lake County. And I didn't see it happen, but it was rival pot growers for sure. But anyways, right before the fires in Ukiah, California started, I was driving down Brook Trails Road, which is in Willits, California. My girlfriend was in the car. It wasn't even dark. That's how bright this fucking light was. It was maybe like 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's difficult to describe, but there was like this blue streak that shot down straight out of the sky. It kind of looked like lightning, but I mean, it was bright blue. And, occultists say the light of Lucifer is blue. And I thought, did Lucifer just fall from heaven? Of course, not a serious thought, but that's what it looked like. And the craziest part of it is that it was like a streak like that. And then it turned into a little, like a perfect circle when it exploded. And there was a little mushroom cloud. And it didn't hit the ground, though. It looked like it blew up or something, like the little mushroom cloud and the circle were well above the ground. And I pulled over and I waited for my girlfriend to say something. And she's like, what the fuck was that? And I just thought it's got to be some kind of weird shooting star. Like maybe it entered like really, really close to the atmosphere. And then a few weeks later, I saw, some other people in Ukiah, California. They claimed that they saw it as well, and it actually hit a mesa, and that perhaps I just couldn't see that from where I was. So I guess what I'm getting at is that I've replayed it over and over again in my mind. Other people that witnessed it seem to be of the same. It definitely looked it definitely looked artificial. It didn't look like a shooting star or lightning or. And so I've considered the possibility for sure that it was some sort of like weapon that they are actually lighting California on fire for some reason. So at any rate, thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Look forward to the next one. I think we're actually going to start doing Saturdays instead of Fridays, just because there are a lot more people on YouTube on Saturday, and I didn't look at the analytics before I started scheduling that live stream. We are working on the searching for wild ayahuasca video that should be done in a few days, and we'll be out. And I hope I was able to offer some useful advice. I was going to talk about crypto. Maybe that is something that I'll get into next time, as far as like offering what could potentially be empowering investments for conscious people. Of course, Bitcoin and some of these other crypto. The way that they mine uses a tremendous amount of energy. So if you're concerned about your carbon footprint, there are companies that are doing light mining that are much less energy intensive. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, try to get that sorted out. So thank you so much for watching. Hit the like button, share, subscribe. Please do support us on Patreon, or if you want to make a contribution through PayPal or Zelle, there is an email in the description that you can use. And we are trying to raise as much money as we can in the next 10 days or so before we go to Puyo, because I have to pay a small crew and I'm going to have to donate some money to the indigenous. And I don't mind that at all. In fact, that's why I'm doing this. I saw a video today about how Chevron was like, they needed to dispose of a bunch of waste from their oil refineries in Ecuador, where I live. and they were literally just dumped it into the river and sprayed it all over the village. I mean, the kids had oil all over their feet, and I mean, it is so infuriating and horrific and horrible. I'm really over the last like week or so, I've really started to feel compelled to really start trying to put more of my efforts into environmental protection and aligning myself as much as I can with the indigenous people so that we can try to put a stop to the fucking madness. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you again very soon.